Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Pivot Well by Sarah, and today we are going to transparently talk about life for me and others who have been in therapy for a long time, before and after. I'm going to be very honest with you and share real expectations of the before and after therapy. Sometimes I do feel and act, I think like therapy is this magic wand that fixes everything, and in some ways it did because of the drastic change I had before and after. But I don't want to sit here and act like I'm also not still dealing with mental health issues. When you go through trauma, when you go through abuse, when you go through anything that alters your mindset, there's going to be forever consequences. And before therapy, I would have thought, well, then why bother fixing it? I'm just going to figure out how to just block that part of my life out. And that's quite literally what I did. I have a hard time remembering my childhood. I have a hard time remembering a lot before I moved to Florida, because so much of it I just wanted to block out for various reasons. Some of it I wanted to block out because I felt like I didn't get a chance to fulfill or finish it. So like I love gymnastics. That was taken away from me. So I kind of block out that part of me a lot because that little girl lost something she loved. I blocked out for a long time. I've been working on like trying to reconnect this, but my grandparents, and thinking about them a lot because I wasn't able to be around them. I wasn't able to see them. I had a lot that was left unsaid, and that pain was so great that I didn't want to think about it. And in my life, that's what I do. When pain is so great, I just block it out because I don't want to think about it. I'm terrible at loss. I can't watch the end of a season, like the season finale of a show, because I don't want the show to end. When I'm reading books, sometimes I'll stop towards the end if I'm really connecting with the characters, because I don't want that to end. If I know someone who's moving, I don't want to be there when they're leaving because I don't want to say goodbye. I have a hard time with the ending of things. And that was really frustrating for me because I kind of felt weak in a lot of ways. What I perceived originally as strength, I started to feel like, you can't even like finish Parks and Recreation. No, and I don't want to. You can't even finish Schitt's Creek? No, because I can't say goodbye. Plus, I know the spoilers, and I can't do that. Because a lot of my life when I was younger was, instead of having that ending, I would just leave it kind of like hanging so that there could still be a happy ending, or that those parts of my life would still be attached. Like my grandparents, I didn't want to think about them because I didn't want to feel like that part of my life was over, which I will get emotional thinking about because it was the happy time of my life being with them. And so I don't want to think about it as being over. And so that's kind of going like a little bit down a rabbit hole, but I want you to understand that a lot of things that I talk about, I still struggle with. I still struggle with loss. I still struggle with mental health. I still struggle with depression. I struggle with being overwhelmed, shutting down, PTSD, an array of things. But there has been so much that has changed for the better. And I want to talk about some of the good things that have come out of me being in therapy rather than focus on all the bad. I want to be transparent with them, but I want to focus on what therapy has allowed me to do with that bad part of my life. I used to live my life in like this constant state of fight or flight. I felt like I was always on high alert. I was always sick because of that. I was always like in this high cortisol state of just constantly feeling like I was in danger, because a lot of my life I grew up in that fight or flight. I was raised primarily from the age of 8 until 19 by someone who was very unpredictable. And when kids are in a situation where things are unpredictable, it causes that feeling of fight or flight. I don't know if you feel that way in your life where you're like, I just feel like I'm always on edge and stressed. And if you reflect back to your childhood, it doesn't even have to mean that your parents were extremely abusive per se, but maybe they were highly critical of you. And so you felt like nothing you ever did was good enough. And you were constantly trying to be the best version of yourself and very hard on yourself so you wouldn't trigger that anger or disappointment from your parents. One of my favorite authors and mental health, I guess, I don't know, celebrities, I don't know which one, like mental health key opinion leaders, I don't know what the word I'm looking for there, but like professionals out there, as Brene Brown. I'm sure you've probably heard of her name. However, you may have not heard of her name. If you haven't, please look at anything and everything Brene Brown. I love her. I would love to meet her one day. Why I like her is because I think that she has a really good way of telling stories and talking about stories. Actually, she calls herself like a researcher of stories. And it's something that allows everyone to connect, because we don't all have the same experiences. We don't have the same, exact lives growing up. However, we probably all have some kind of a similar connector. But then, those of us who, some say, well, I don't know if I was really abused, but things just seemed off in my childhood. There's probably a common thread of the hypercritical parents, and that's something that Brene Brown has talked a lot about, is feeling like her parents were very hypercritical. And so that was one of the first things that I think I was able to identify. I was raised by someone who was very unpredictable and very hypercritical, and so I never knew what the consequences of my actions would be. And I never was able to determine truly what was good or bad because of that. And consequently, I started to feel like I was always the problem outside of my home. So when I moved away, I had this feeling of like, I'm always wrong. Everything I say is wrong. I'd stay up late at night thinking about things I said that were wrong, things I could have done better. I would sit and fester over situations for months, years. The stupidest stuff. I'll give you an example, a story of this. One time, I was hanging out with some people, and one of them was a dental hygienist. And so I didn't know a lot about dental care. I mean, I knew about a toothbrush and that was it. But she and some others were like talking, and they all seemed to know what each other were talking about. So I kind of felt like I don't really know what's going on here, but okay, I'm trying to fit in, And they're talking about their electric toothbrushes and the things they use, this, that, and the other. And I said something like, oh yeah, I have an electric toothbrush that's also a water pick. Because they were talking about those. And I didn't know what a water pick was. I had an electric toothbrush at one point, and I don't know. I just threw that out there because I thought, that sounds right. It wasn't a real thing. And at the time, I could tell by the reaction I'd said something wrong. Like, oh my gosh, they're going to think I'm lying. And now what have I done? I look like an idiot. They think I lie all the time. So that's where I went. And it was a spiral. I'm telling you this because for some reason that stuck out for years. I had this feeling of cringe whenever I would think about that. I didn't want to look like a liar. I didn't know them very long. But I also was just trying to fit in, and I didn't know what to say, and I was just saying something dumb. I promise you, they probably didn't think about that after that day, but I was so stuck on this for years. I'm telling you, it was wild. And I had a lot of situations like that. And why was I stuck in it? Because growing up, I would have something that I would say, and I was never told why the reaction was what it was. And so I would sit and I would think and I would overanalyze everything, look at it from every angle and be like, well, maybe it's because I said this. Well, maybe because of that. Well, this is the consequence of that. I was just making up stuff because I'd never been given a clear answer. That was something recently my sister and I talked about. The silent treatment was common in our house. Someone would blow up and we wouldn't know what we said or did to cause that type of reaction. And so yeah, you sit and you fester with it. You think, what did I say wrong? What did I do wrong this time? And what are the consequences going to be? And you don't know. And so when I got older and I would say stupid things, I would sit and think about it because there was never that closure. Similar situation. And in my mind, it could not differentiate those two things. So logically, I could differentiate, this is not that person. This is not the person who was hypercritical of me growing up. This is a friend. But subconsciously, that fight or flight Sarah was not able to determine that, to differentiate that. And so I would have that just with all kinds of things. I would think everybody was like analyzing me at church. Is Sarah doing enough? She needs to do more. She needs to look like she's working hard at school. Is Sarah making enough or doing enough with like her schoolwork? Is she making good grades at work? I had to be the best. I had to always like, whatever you say, I'll do it. Yep, I'll do that. I'll take care of that. People are like, Sarah, you don't have to, that's not your job. That's okay, I'll do it. And I was always trying to be the best because I was afraid of like the perception of me. And I lived in this prison of just constantly trying to please everyone around me because I still had not yet understood that once you leave that setting of those wildly ridiculous punishments for absolutely no logical reason, once you leave that home and you go into the real world, that's not the case. I'm not going to get punished for saying something about a Waterpik electric toothbrush, okay? I'm not going to get punished if I don't do the extra side work at Olive Garden where I worked. It's not my job. I don't need to do it. Who was I trying to please at this job that I was making like not a lot of money? I'm just a server, but I just felt this need, to be the best because I was always afraid of how people perceived me. So I never wanted to leave any room for them to perceive me negatively. That was a prison. It was a prison. It was tiring. It was isolating. It was lonely. And it was exactly where I was supposed to be growing up. Abusers will often get you in this state of making you feel that way. They want you to constantly bow to their demands because, who wouldn't want somebody who would do everything, all the extra work for you, and you don't have to say anything? That's the ideal place to have someone. And so that's where I ended up being. And then that carried on into my job, my relationships, my social life. I was constantly planning parties for everyone. I was always trying to make them perfect, always making sure I invited everybody. I would invite literally everybody, and then the people who were hosting would be mad at me, and I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I was such a people pleaser, and it's so interesting because that was a response to the environment I grew up in. And again, it doesn't have to be, this hardcore abuser doing this to you, but it can be someone who was taking advantage of you. And this is where I think it's really important to remember two things can be true. Somebody can have been raised in a poor environment themselves. So your parents could have been raised in a poor environment. And they don't have to necessarily be bad people, but they have bad habits that they learned and they never learned were wrong, and they pass them on to you. And I think that's where therapy is so important. It's a twofold reason. It's going to break that so that you don't pass that on to your children or those around you. And it's also going to free you from feeling that way about others and their perception of you, because you don't have to. What's the consequence of you not doing the extra work? It's okay to be a hard worker and to do well in your job, but I was sometimes just doing way too much, way outside what I should have been doing, and people took advantage of that. So what would be the consequence of me not doing it? Literally nothing. Okay, because that wasn't even my job. And then I had to start learning that to break things down. So with the toothbrush situation, what is the consequence of this for me? Because I didn't realize yet that there was no punishment for something like this. I wasn't going to face those punishments I had growing up. Okay, I said something wrong. Big deal. And I started to say so what over everything. And I think there's this book out called Let Them right now. I haven't read it. I'm terrible at reading. My ADHD is not a fan of reading, but I want to because I know the principle of it. And it is kind of what I learned in therapy, which was that so what? Okay, they're going to think about this. or they're going to think this way about me. So what? Like, what actually is going to happen? Okay, I don't make an A in this class. I make a B. So what? What's going to happen? I'm not the top of the class. Oh no. What's going to happen, Sarah? Nothing, because I'm an adult. I had to like switch my mindset from this constant feeling of there's going to be a punishment to no. I mean, there's the consequences of my own actions, but I'm still in control of myself. And I have always said, like, I have gotten to this point with my journey in therapy that I love, because if I do something, I'm willing to accept the consequences of it, because again, I don't fear those consequences anymore. Normally I think through things and I evaluate them. I'm very hyper analytical to a fault, actually, but again, I grew up having to constantly analyze everything. But my therapist is always like, you don't have, there's not a set plan for everything. There's not a set path for everything. I'm like, yes, there is. For me, there is. So I would sit and I would map out every possible scenario for a while of, okay, well, if I don't volunteer and do this thing that this person is pushing me to do because I'm just honestly tired because I'm working 3 jobs. If I don't do that, what's going to happen? Oh, they're going to think I'm lazy. So what? Or, as that book would probably say, let them. Then what? Well, then maybe they're going to tell other people and they're going to all think I'm lazy. So what? Let them. Well, okay, but then I might not be asked again to do something. And then I had to start like realizing, okay, well, if somebody's not going to ask you to do something again, just because this one time you were busy, is that somebody you want to be working with? Or is that somebody you want to hang out with? I really had to start breaking it down, and it was so freeing to finally get to this point where that was automatically happening in my brain. Because before, those issues of overthinking and overanalyzing were automatically happening, and I couldn't even like recognize that was going on for a long time. So it was like this internal computer system constantly analyzing everything and overanalyzing it and spitting out these negative consequences of these things. So I had to basically like reprogram my brain to start like doing that behind the scenes of the so what? What is it? What's going to happen? Nothing's going to happen. And then the next step is to test that, like to start actually implementing it. And I would say no. And then what happened? Oh, nothing happened. I'm not feeling well. I'm not going to go to this party. Oh, and nobody got mad. Like you just start to realize, wow, I've been made to believe that the world is this awful and critical place, and it's what you make it. Like your world around you is really what you make it. I'm sure there are people that are critical of me and they're judging me, but so what? What are you going to do? Like I have a job, I have a husband, I have a house, I have a dog, I have like my life. And that's actually something that my grounding, like I would do with my therapist if I was feeling very anxious about something. It was like, it's not going to affect my house. It's not going to affect my job. It's not going to affect my, relationship. It's not going to affect all these things that I had prioritized. And then sometimes I would also have to remind myself, if I was feeling really heightened with anxiety, hey, you're in your house that you own, that no one's going to take away. You are at your job. You are like just showing myself, hey, I'm in control right now, because that automatic like feeling of being out of control would just kick on. And I hated that. And so when I say like a journey to mental freedom, that's like a big part of it, being able to just breathe, like let it go. It's fine. And I would sometimes have to like go like this, and I would have to like physically let some of this anxiety out, people exercise to get their anxiety out, whatever it takes. Sometimes you have to like physically, externally release that anxiety too. And then eventually it gets easier and easier and easier, because you suddenly start learning that those consequences that you assumed would happen because somebody was controlling you and making you believe that the world was like that, you start to realize that that was just what they wanted you to feel the world was like, because they wanted you in a certain place, and that's where you were. And once you get out of that place, you realize that that wasn't the reality. And so that was very freeing. And then the second part of the freedom that I found from therapy was my ability to then start recognizing those types of patterns in other people. Oh, wait, if somebody starts saying things like I heard growing up, maybe they're manipulative. Maybe they're just trying to control me. And is that somebody I want to be around? And this transfers into relationships, and this transfers into jobs and bosses. And so you learn to set boundaries, because now you're an adult. You have the ability and the control to do that. And so you have to learn to set the boundaries and say, no, you're not, that's not going to happen. And you have to make sure that you are not putting yourself in a position to have that control over you. So that's why I mentioned previously, like, getting out of those situations is really critical, because you don't want them to have like that control over you. And one of the first things I did when I moved out of my house was, it wasn't the first thing when I moved out. It was the first thing I did when I severed myself from that environment, because even when I moved, I was still very much controlled. That person was still in my head telling me, people were watching me and telling me all these different things, and they were all lies, but I believed them because that was what I was so used to. And so when I finally said enough is enough, and I'm like putting up that boundary, cutting my ties, and that person was like, well, you're not going to use my car then. And I had already bought a car because I knew that she was going to say that. Well, you're not going to use my phone. And I was like, yep, I got my own phone. I got my own insurance. Whatever you're about to say, I did it. I don't want any of it. The stuff that's at home, you can keep it. I don't need it anymore. I wanted to make sure there was nothing left for that person to have control over me with. And so I started my life over. And then I made sure that if I felt there was conditions in relationships, in jobs, in friendships, that I quickly identified those and I addressed them. And you don't want to be around someone whose love or whatever for you is conditional. I think that's the beauty. Like, as a Christian, one of the things that you hear in the Bible all the time is about unconditional love. And I never really thought about it. It was like a word you would say that just didn't make sense, like unconditional love. I never stopped to think, like, what does that mean? But unconditional love is the most beautiful type of love there is. No conditions to it. No strings attached. No, I will only love you if you do this, and you do this, and you do this. The second that you set a boundary with someone, I'm not going to continue paying these bills for you. I'm not going to continue cleaning up your mess. I'm not going to continue, only watching what you want to watch. All these different things. The second that you start doing that, and the person says, "What? Well, hold on, yes you are," and they get mad because you set the boundaries, that's your indicator that that's conditional love. You don't want that. You don't want anything in your life that's conditional. Now, there's a difference in like having your principles and your morals, and in a marriage, obviously there are ground rules and there are things, that you want to have in place. But I think that's, again, where therapy is super helpful, being able to identify the difference of that. What is conditional and what is just respectful, because there is a difference. And again, if you look at like the Christian principles I have, God's love for me is unconditional. There are rules and there are, things that I am held to, but I do them because I love him. And that's something that I was able to identify pretty young, actually. Respect. I don't remember at what point, but I was still living back at home, and I was able to identify that I was obedient to my dad out of love, because I did love him, and I was obedient to my stepmom because I was afraid of her. So obedience of love versus obedience of fear, and being able to identify those. And that was something in therapy I started to not just see in that one isolated situation, but just in general. Am I doing things because I am afraid, or am I doing them because I love that person? And that's really like a valuable tool to have in life. If you come from a bad background, starting to think about, what was I doing because of fear, and what have I continued to do as an adult because of fear, instead of learning, oh, I'm doing that because I love this person. I want to respect the rules that were set in place. Like for me, again, if the 10 Commandments, I do that because I love God and I respect him, not because I fear him, because I was raised in a Baptist household, and until I was like 8 years old, there was a lot of fear of not obeying. And then, I mean, even actually, no, in my childhood period, there was a lot of obedience of love because I was afraid of the consequences. I didn't want to face the wrath, And then eventually I started to realize that, there's a love involved in any relationship, including with God. So I started to try to change my patterns to doing things because of love and respect rather than fear in any area of my life. And that was very freeing because you don't feel trapped. You don't feel like you are obligated to do something to be loved. At no point in your life should you feel that you have to do something to be loved. Love is supposed to be unconditional. Respect comes with that. You do things out of respect because you love them. When you can identify that, it's very freeing, and suddenly, again, you're rewiring your brain, which had been wired to think one way. Automatically, you have to go in, and that's where therapy is so helpful. You're almost like having to rewire your brain into a healthier direction. No, I do it because I love them. And if I'm afraid of someone, I don't need them in my life. There's no need for that. No room for that, really. So some other habits I used to have prior to therapy was I was an over-explainer. So again, I never knew what the consequence of something was. If I felt somebody didn't like my answer, I would start to over-explain because I didn't want to get in trouble, because I was not prepared. I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know what the consequences were. And that's a consequence of growing up in a household where you are walking on eggshells all the time. So I would over-explain everything. And I love, Mary-Kate and Ashley had on I think it was Jimmy Fallon. They were in an interview and they were like, no is a complete sentence. And I was like, what? No way. I need to explain why I'm saying no. That's still hard for me, by the way. I still struggle with the no is a complete sentence. If I don't want to help somebody because I'm tired, or it's been a long week, or I don't have the energy, whatever the reason is, I feel like I'm being taken advantage of, it's okay to just say no, I'm good. But I would be like, no, I've got something else going on, and I don't think I'll have time, but if you really need me, I guess I can do it. That's normally how it goes, and I'm still trying to work on that. It's a lot better than it used to be, but I would over-explain my no. Or if I was going to school for a certain thing and somebody felt like that was the wrong decision, I would sit there and over-explain it. I was not so much I wouldn't change my mind per se, but I would have a full set of notes prepared to over-explain my reason for doing something, or for thinking something, or for believing in something. And yeah, I had to learn I don't need to over-explain everything. I don't owe everyone an explanation for everything. That can be very tiring too. All of these things that I had to undo were just things that were so draining, so exhausting. And I was constantly go. It was a prison. It was what I needed freedom from. And that's where I would have panic attacks, because I was constantly in that state of fight or flight, hyper aware, and anxiety is natural. If you don't have anxiety, no, you're going to have one of two things. You're either going to be anxious, or you're going to be someone who shuts down and maybe goes into that depression. And I have times where something will cause anxiety and something will cause depression. And I actually have been working on trying to determine why something causes one versus the other, because eventually you can start rooting back to the base of those feelings and those triggers or whatever it is. But yeah, anxiety can look different. For some people, they can be very go, very hyper and overactive. And then some people can shut down because they're anxious. And I have both. sometimes I have so much on my plate that I shut down, and sometimes I have so much on my plate that I am anxiously taking care of it. I found that I'm very fear motivated too, which is a problem, something I hate. I hate. Again, like 9 years of therapy, guys, I still have problems I'm working through, and that is one. I have a hard time staying motivated because I only learned how to be motivated by fear. So everything I did was because I was afraid of the consequence of not doing it. And so when you take away the fear, I didn't know how to do something because I wanted to, or because it was just something that needed to be done. It was something I had to learn. I'm having to learn to this day. Like for work, I can get my job done because I'm afraid of not doing it. So there's that fear motivator. This podcast has been a challenge because I'm not fear motivated into doing it. I have no reason I have to do it. I'm doing it because I want to, but I've noticed that I have a hard time staying motivated. So maybe that initial excitement that people who have ADHD might understand. You have a new hobby and you want to do it and you get excited about it, and then it's like, how do you stay consistent with it? And so I'm doing this partly because I want to challenge myself to be consistent with something. I want to help, and this has been a dream of mine, and I felt like my lack of motivation has been a prison for me. So one of the reasons I'm working on this. So if I'm not quite in like a pattern of posting yet, it's really just like, honestly, surprised I've done as many as I have. So I'm very proud of myself for that. But I'm working on it. So, it's something that I still deal with. But yeah, anxiety can look like the shutting down or the being, all over the place, which I do both. And it was actually when I started to kind of break that fight or flight feeling, I didn't know what to do because there was like this emptiness. And I was dealing with depression during that because I didn't know who I was outside of being a fight or flight Sarah. I had to learn what I was like at the root of me. Who am I? I'm still working on that. So much of me was built around what others wanted me to be, or what I was afraid, I guess I was feared into. And so I'm still learning a lot about me. And with that comes a lot of, I have to have a lot of grace with myself. That's okay. It takes time. I was a certain way for, 20 plus years. So how long do you think it's going to take to find you? It's not going to happen overnight. You can't go on a live, laugh, love vacation and come back and be a different person. Trust me, I've tried. I can be a different person for like 2 weeks and then I'm like, ugh. And then this was something else, I guess, like that therapy really helps with. When you hit that slump, where maybe you do have some good weeks and then something reminds you of something bad. Instead of being like really hard on yourself, you can give yourself some grace and say that's okay. And I've learned that my feelings of sadness, if something does trigger me, it would used to put me in like this sadness or depression for like weeks. And that time has narrowed because I've been able to identify like the root of it, what caused it, and kind of just like, hey, it's okay to feel sad. Sadness is a normal feeling by everyone. It doesn't have to be even labeled with the word depression. I'm trying to work on that. Like, I can just be sad. It's a normal feeling that everyone has. And the more I started to work on that and recognize that, the shorter amount of time I was dealing with that. And again, I do recognize that there is a difference between environmental depression and chemical, like a chemical imbalance. So I'm clearly speaking from my perspective of I have environmental triggers that will make me feel depressed. Or so if I'm overly anxious or something triggers me and I'm thinking about, what's happened, of course I'm going to be sad, not depressed, sad. But yeah, that's, others would call it that. And so that's something that I found a therapeutic way to work through that is with therapy. And as I continue on with my journey in therapy, and I still am working because I still have so much I want to reach, I'm just looking for peace. That's something I crave. And I don't know if I'll ever be just like completely content. I thought I would be by now, and sometimes it can be discouraging. And therapy is like working out. And there's a reason that people take progress pictures, because if you don't see the difference. And so some days I'll be like, it's been a waste. Why have I done all this work? I'm not looking at my progress pictures. I think journaling is really good for those of you who can actually do it. I wish I could have journaled or podcast through my journey in therapy, because it would be like a progress picture, where I've been and where I've come from and where I'm at now. But I was talking to my therapist the other day, and she said, like, when was the last time you felt peace? And my automatic response is like, I never feel peace. I never feel peace. And I don't feel it very often, but I can't say that I never do, because there's times where I might, take a shower, get ready for bed, and I'm sitting in bed and I look around and I'm just like, I'm so grateful for this life that I've worked really hard to create. And I can have like that moment of peace. And it took me even a long time to recognize what peace looked like. It's such a journey. I say journey to mental freedom. Your mind is a journey, working on yourself is a journey, and it's forever going to be. There's, I don't know if there's a pinnacle of your mental state on earth. I believe that's what I'm most excited about in heaven. I can't imagine what it would feel like to have no anxiety. Oh, what a dream. Can you imagine just like never being anxious? I'm sure some people are like, yeah, not everybody's anxious all the time, Sarah. Okay, I am. I'm anxious a lot, okay? And if I'm not anxious, there's like some other feeling. I have big feelings. We're working on it. But what I've come to realize is give yourself grace. Allow yourself to have that journey, because there is so much freedom in the results. I absolutely know I have come a long way from my day one till now. I can't even begin to describe the difference of my anxiety level from before, feeling like all eyes were on me. Everybody was judging me. Everybody was criticizing me. I needed to be the best. I needed to be able to make everyone happy, to not as much of that. I still struggle. I want to make everyone happy. But I have boundaries in place. I have learned the capability of setting boundaries to make myself happy, because it's really important to not just think about everybody else, to think about you. Put your own oxygen mask on before putting the person next to you's on. Otherwise, you'll pass out. So with that, I have kind of rambled a little bit, but I feel like a lot of this is, I hope it's somewhat relatable, or again, maybe you've recognized these patterns in someone else in your life. And one thing I really hope people get out of this is that it's normal to not be normal. There is no normal. Normal is just a word that was used to make people feel bad about themselves, I feel like. Set your own normal. Make your own standards for what's normal. And if you're able to, start to work towards that journey to your mental freedom, because you deserve it. You deserve to not feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, because there's other shoulders around that can help you carry your burdens. That's a really hard one for me, but that's for another day. We'll talk about that another day. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. You know what? Maybe next time we'll talk about that feeling of being a burden, because that's something I felt like for a long time and I had to work on overcoming. But thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. And don't forget to subscribe to make sure you can see when I post my next episode, because who knows? We'll see where my motivation's at in the next couple of days. But thanks, guys, for watching. Appreciate it.